Hey everybody, this is your Digital Super Saiyan 3 back here with another video, and welcome back to the next installment of Spider-Man month, of the month of August in 2022. As we're celebrating 60 years of the wall crawler. Anyway, so back on to another, since I've been talking about so far is Spider-Man Cartoons. Another show I should talk about right now that was a hit with fans, and a lot of people call this the other good Spider-Man cartoon, The Spectacular Spider-Man. Now, this was a show that came out in 2008 and ended in 2009, or it was canceled in 2009. It had a total runtime of 26 episodes, but the storytelling in this show was really good. The show's animation was head and done by animation veteran Greg Weisman. And yes, Greg Weisman did a lot of Disney cartoons along with Tad Stones. Greg Weisman also did Kim Possible. So yeah, this show is kind of like an animated superhero show in the style of Kim Possible, since technically the show was done by the same people who did Kim Possible. But anyway, I'm getting off topic here, so let's talk about what I consider the best episodes of the show, or just my all-time favorite episodes of The Spectacular Spider-Man. So, this is my list of my 10 favorite Spectacular Spider-Man episodes. Number 10 is Interactions. Now, this is the first episode I ever saw on television. This is the episode where Maxwell Dillon becomes Electro, or Max Dillon becomes Electro. Max Dillon in this version was a repairman who worked for ESU, and while helping out Kirk Connors in the laboratory, Kirk Connors' laboratory, he basically gets himself electrocuted, doused in water, and electrocuted again after a terrifying accident. And it infused him with several volts of electricity, turning him into Electro. Throughout this episode, we see Maxwell Dillon divulged into madness, as he soon realizes that without a cure, he's not Max Dillon, he's Electro. And Crispin Freeman does the voice of Electro, and Crispin Freeman I know who has done plenty of Japanese anime, like he's been the voice of Alucard in Hellsing and Itachi in Naruto. He brings his all as Electro here in this series, and I gotta say, he was a really damn good Electro. The fight scenes were so well done in this episode. Oh yes, did I forget to mention this was the second episode of the entire series? So yeah, a really good episode. And it was, I think, the only standalone Electro episode, because other than that, Electro's other appearances mainly had him interact with members of the Sinister Six. Number 9 is First Steps. So, this is a Season 2 episode, and in this episode, Flint Marko, aka the Sandman, is all about the big score. And throughout, he's having to deal with Spider-Man and also being egged on by Hammerhead. But we see that although Flint Marko may be a crook, he's not such a bad guy, because we do see his softer side in this episode, especially in a scene where he helps a little girl build a sandcastle, and he's really nice to her and tells her to run along home because it's going to get cold outside. We see that Flint is not such a bad guy. Sure, he may have worked with the Sinister Six in attempts to kill Spider-Man, but we see that he's not so bad. I mean, hell, we do see his heroic side as he does save a ship from going down, as he risks his life to shield everyone from a massive explosion. Of course, Flint didn't technically die, but we saw him just fade away, and we wondered if he is still out there. Anyway, yeah, this was the only villain reform episode of the entire show we get. So, it's a really good one, and I love the fight scenes between Sandman and Spider-Man in this episode. So yeah, First Steps was a really good episode. Number 8 is Group Therapy. This is the first episode that assembles the Sinister Six after a massive prison breakout. The Sinister Six roster in this show consists of Electro, Shocker, Doc Ock, Vulture, the Sandman, and Rhino. And yes, this did come during the Black Suit story arc. Yes, they actually did the Black Suit story arc in less than 3 episodes. And this was the second of the Black Suit's appearance of the Black Suit Spider-Man, and this was actually my favorite appearance of this version of Black Suit Spider-Man. The highlight for me is the massive fight that takes place during this episode at the climax of the episode, while Peter is basically sleep fighting as he's fighting against the Sinister Six, as basically the symbiote is technically using him, and he's not using the symbiote. Yes, basically the symbiote is in control of Peter's actions while he's sleeping. And yes, also in this episode, Peter also learned that his aunt suffered a heart attack. Yeah, Aunt May even suffered a heart attack, and that happened during a moment when Aunt May and Anna Watson went to the opera. Next up at number 7 is The Invisible Hand. Now, this is the first episode that features the Rhino, as Alex O'Hearn becomes the Rhino in the beginning of this episode, as he is given a armor that makes him incredibly strong and durable, and giving him the powers of a, well, rhinoceros. But it's also a good reveal for the big man, as the big man had mostly been off screen for most of his appearances before this episode came out, and we actually got the first showing of Tombstone. So yeah, this was a good reveal for Tombstone in this episode. So yeah, the Tombstone stuff at the end is the main reason why I put this episode on here. And yes, I did like the fight scene between Spidey and the Rhino in this episode as well. Number 6 is the uncertainty principle. The uncertainty principle. Certainty principle. Basically, this episode took place around Halloween, and it's involving the Green Goblin. Oh yes, and the Green Goblin sets up a trap for both Spider-Man and Tombstone. And yes, he also kidnaps Hammerhead. This episode is just so well done with the action-packed and with the action in this episode, and probably is my favorite of the Green Goblin episodes that appear throughout the show. I mean, yes, he's built up as the show's main antagonist, since he is like the biggest bad of the entire series, and I love how they included Harry Osborn passed out on the couch and ties into his addiction to this chemical that Oscorp created called globulin green, which was a performance enhancer. And yes, this series also tied into the whole addiction storylines. This is a really good episode that took place around Halloween, and I definitely say it's a really good Green Goblin episode regardless. Number 5 is Reaction. Now, this is the first appearance of this show's version of Dr. Octopus, aka Doc Ock. Now, yes, Doc Ock in this version was a scientist who worked for Oscorp. And, of course, he had been used as a doormat for Norman Osborn throughout the first few episodes. And then in this episode, he finally becomes Doc Ock as the arms become welded to his body. And he officially becomes a supervillain. Honestly, Honestly, I love this episode for a good first appearance for Doc Ock, and yeah, I gotta say, I think Spectacular Spider-Man did Doc Ock better than any previous Spider-Man cartoon has done. Yes, even more so than the 90s show. And I like the 90s show Doc Ock, don't get me wrong, but I actually think the Spectacular Spider-Man did him a lot better. Number 4 is Destructive Testing. Now, this is the first appearance of Kraven the Hunter. So, yes, Season 2 it brought us villains like Mysterio and Kraven. And it's kind of a shame that the series never got revived for another season. All because of Disney. But back on to Destructive Testing. This was probably my favorite Kraven the Hunter episode. After seeing news articles about Spider-Man, that he is now interested in, well, hunting the ultimate hunt. And yes, this did take place during the whole Master Planner arc that they were doing in this series. Next up at number 3 is Reinforcement. Now this episode follows Destructive Testing as the Master Planner, aka revealed to be Dr. Octopus, decides to quote-unquote create another Sinister Six, this time consisting of Shocker, Rhino, well, not Shocker, technically it was Electro, Vulture, Mysterio, Kraven, Sandman, and the Rhino. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Shocker's behind bars. But yeah, this was a really good episode, and this one took place during Christmas. And there was this subplot where Gwen thought Peter had been crushed by the Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center. But overall, I love how Peter had burnt his tongue before the fight because he burnt his tongue from hot cocoa, and there are some funny quips in this episode. My favorite line in this episode is when Josh Keaton as Spider-Man says, "Mysterio! I'm using that stupid fishbowl of yours as a snow globe!" But other than that, it's a really good episode. It was definitely another good Sinister Six episode. So yeah, I gotta admit, I do like the way they did the Sinister Six in this series. Next up at number 2 is Identity Crisis. So, after the Venom symbiote rebonded with Eddie Brock, and Eddie Brock had been menacing Peter for 3 episodes straight, what really makes this version of Venom so great is that he traps Peter in a rock and a hard place in this episode. He basically threatens to expose Peter's identity, and you have Peter being harassed by, well, paparazzi thinking that Peter is Spider-Man, after Venom revealed Peter's identity at the Daily Bugle. So, pretty much, you have Peter not only having to deal with Venom, but also having to deal with the fact that he's still trying to cover up his secret. He's still trying to keep his secret from people. So yeah, this is a very huge struggle for Peter Parker to deal with. And at number 1, I put as the best episode of The Spectacular Spider-Man is Gangland. Now, a Valentine's Day summit was called as Doc Ock, Tombstone, and Silvermane, who all have different values of how the criminal world should be handled. Tombstone thinks that the criminal underworld should be run like a business. Silvermane thinks that old school magia should reign supreme. And then you got Dr. Octopus, who brings in the new class of criminal about running the criminal empire as a scientist, or as a science. So, yeah, a massive fight scene breaks out in this huge-ass opera house. And, of course, opera music is used during the whole fight scene, including even when Spider-Man comes in. I love the use of opera music in this, and yes, Spider-Man does manage to take down all three of the criminals one by one. And it's just a great episode overall. But my favorite part of it is the ending when the Green Goblin reveals that he is the new big man of crime, since Spidey had just taken down Tombstone. Of course, sure, Tombstone made bail, but his criminal empire, well, it's in the crapper. So overall, the Spectacular Spider-Man to me was often or not a forgotten gem of a series. I really appreciate, you can never appreciate something before it's gone, you know? And that was kind of what the Spectacular Spider-Man was. It's a shame that this show will never get another season, but I have hope for the future that someday it might be revived by the gods. Anyway, this has been your Digital Super Saiyan 3, and I will see you guys next time for another Spider-Man related video in the future. See ya!